What's going on, workforce? Brian here.
Chris here.
And today we're bringing you guys an article that was posted over at the Washington Post. I'll include a link in the description of this video. Please go click it. That's one way that we can continue to get these kind of articles, this kind of coverage of Final Fantasy XIV, is that newspapers and gaming sites, if the people who put the work into these interviews see traction and traffic. So be sure to go give them some love so they can get their page clicks and we can get more coverage for Final Fantasy XIV out into the world. Today, we are going to dive into the full article and kind of break it up, kind of almost like paragraph by paragraph, give you guys our thoughts, and as well, we always want to know your thoughts. But before we get into it, right now, most likely when the time this video goes live, we're going to be podcasting with Ethis Asher. So either after this video or before, come hang out for the podcast, or you'll see it broken up over the course of the next couple of days. Chris, why don't you take us to the start of this article and let's go and dive into it. There's some really interesting things that I'm excited to get your thoughts on.
So basically, they kind of just introduce what Final Fantasy is. And they say that A Realm Reborn is now considered the ultimate success story of how an always online multiplayer game can recalibrate after a high-profile failure. Like a Snyder's cut for fantasy role-playing games, except with a proven track record of 20 million monthly players. I don't know that that's accurate. Is it 20 million total players? And one of the longest shelf lives of any online video game.
Everyone has, every article that's not in the know reports that. That is 20 million registered, not subscribers.
Counts created.
Yeah, that's a whole different thing. I've seen it. People are saying Final Fantasy XIV has 20 million subscribers. I would love for it to have 20 million subscribers. For every one of the subscribers that has it. But game companies have gone away from reporting on that number.
I bet it's closer to 500,000 to 2 million active monthly.
Yeah,
I bet it's a tiny fraction of that, and I bet it's that same tiny percentage, give or take, across every online MMO, especially that has a large, robust free trial.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, typically with these numbers, they do not count free trials. So whenever they've reported the registered users, those are people who have actively bought the game. That doesn't mean that this isn't that in and of itself, but traditionally, that's how it's been reported historically. So
that still doesn't account for like sales and then games like BDO or whatever, where the initial game download is free. They're not. That's not a trial. You are in the game. I don't know. That number is padded somehow. So I just wanted to correct that. I think many press outlets were taking this information, and now you're getting Yoshi-P as interpreted through a translator by Washington Post to someone else, and like there's just a game of telephone where a lot of this stuff, like, I don't think that's quite how that works.
Yeah.
So they said much of the success is attributed to Yoshi-P, as he's affectionately known. Yoshida took over the rehabilitation process as producer and director. He had, they talk about his background as chief planner for Dragon Quest X. A Realm Reborn released in 2013, and almost 8 years later, it remains one of the healthiest online gaming communities in the world. For some, it's a game even more beloved than World of Warcraft. The game just announced its latest upcoming expansion, Endwalker, which of course is why press things like this exist. In a video call interview with the Post, Yoshida said Final Fantasy XIV may never end as long as people keep returning. At its current audience growth rate, he said that Square Enix could see at least another 5 years for the online world. Now, right there, like, I first saw that I saw that covered by one outlet that said that 14 was ending in 5 years.
Yeah.
First of all, it doesn't make sense because it's going to end at the end of an expansion. And so like it's going to be an even number of years from now because we're in an expansion year. So 6.0 would end, and then 7.0 would end, and then we're going to end halfway through. Like, I don't think so.
The other side of it too. I mean, think about 5 years, right? Because it's like expansion. That's kind of like two expansions.
5-year plan.
2 years, 2 expansions in that regards. Typically and traditionally, they're already working on the story and all that stuff. By the time Endwalker comes out, the story and all that for 7.0 should be written. Like all of that design is actually happening years and years in advance. So when he's talking about 5 years in this case, it literally could be connected into that. yeah, we've thought 5 years out. Here's the chunk that's more solid. Here's the chunk that's a little bit more gray, and we'll continue to fill in these gaps. So that's features, content, story, direction, like all of that is connected into it. So it could go well beyond that
Yep.
period. And we'll talk more about that 5 years though, because like a lot of people have actually been pinging me about just the
Right.
5 year topic. And
Yep.
yeah, so we'll come back to that here in a little bit, guys.
5-year goals are very common within kind of talking about how a company plans for things, but keep in mind that Yoshida and the CEO both just confirmed verbally in the showcase event that this is not only Yoshida's life work, but that he has no intention of leaving anytime soon, and he would be okay with this remaining something he works on for the remainder of his life, in that term referring to as a career. So he would follow this all the way through in some form or fashion. Just like Jeff Bezos didn't retire, he's still in charge. So he may start to take back seats as we see his schedule start to include things like 16, but he's not going anywhere. He says, even now our CEO is encouraging us to strive for more players and for 30 million adventurers. He still has future plans for us. Luckily, we don't see any stopping in our momentum. At one point, we thought we may plateau, but fortunately, our player base just continues to expand and grow. This means expansions beyond 2021 and Endwalker, but at least for the near future, it won't mean any new platforms. Despite the game's success, Yoshida says a lot of his team's time is spent on creating expansions and leaves little room for expanding to Xbox or others, as much as they'd love to see the game beyond PlayStation and PC ports.
This is so frustrating to read, and at the same time so incredibly understandable. The fact that, and I've seen a lot of people report, like Yoshi-P says, no plans for the game to come to Xbox based off this article in and of itself. And I think I when they talk about 30 million and they talk about growing, like adding in other like console support seems to be the plan. Like that seems to be an easy way to get more players, is to open up the ecosystem, especially because now I don't think Xbox would count for 10 million, in that regards, but this, I think it goes on a little bit in terms of the cost itself. So does
they talked about at the second half of the live letter last time about the cost of maintaining 25 different clients, because they have a different client for each edition of each platform, and now I've added a PS5 client. They talked about the expense of that. This statement is exactly like the statement that there's no reason to add flying to ARR. It's exactly like the statement that there won't be headgear for Roth and Vieira. This is a statement that we have heard time and time again. And when you talk about money being in the room with Microsoft, you would never go out publicly if secretly behind closed doors they're saying you're not getting a cut of the MOG station through the Xbox store, you're going to put the game on Game Pass, and you're going to pay us for those subscriptions. If they're trying to negotiate a money deal with Microsoft, you don't go out and go, and we wouldn't even need the money, we can do it. You would go like, so like this is what you would say if you were planning to go to Xbox, and it's what you'd say if you weren't planning to go to Xbox. So the statement didn't tell me anything other than that it's not on Xbox, which we already knew. So I'm still like just nothing.
Itching. I'm still just itching. Like, give us something. Give us hope. Or if you're just going to be like, no, PlayStation said no, and so we're here. This is the way it is ultimately. I don't know. I want to see it on Xbox. I'll go ahead and take the next the next section here. So we provide content on a fairly regular basis, and our cycle is rather condensed, Yoshida said. And it's fairly stable. It's a fairly stable cadence that we'll continue to follow. We have to think about the long-term planning with additional platforms. We need additional testing for that particular platform. So it's kind of exponentially grows the amount of resources that we need to be allocated. This stable cadence is a big factor in the game's ongoing success and why the community has generally been pretty happy, unlike so many other quote-unquote live service games, the always online multiplayer games. Yoshida says that when planning expansions, about 70% of the work is already expected to be done, and that leaves the team 30% of its energy to devote to different or innovating feature sets. This has been the approach to each story expansion, like Heaven's Word from 2015 through Endwalker this fall.
Two big things here. Yeah. First of all, this is a massive confirmation of when people say, I don't want my sub going to Relic. I don't want my sub delaying an ultimate. I don't want my sub giving us a blue mage. When somebody's expectations does not align with the content cycle as it's delivered, this tells us roughly 70% of the total resources they can afford to allocate to this game out of your subscription, which is not the every single dollar. Square Enix is a company that pulls from projects to make new projects. They just announced in the Nintendo Direct another great JRPG that's generated no revenue yet. So it got paid for with money from other projects. And 30% of whatever that number is, and number, time, resources, letting people take vacation, will go to things like innovation, things like the new farm system, things like the trust system, things like Boja and Delibram, that there isn't really an exact replica of that before. It is new and it's innovative and it's different.
Project Triangle Strategy, like, looks incredible.
Cool.
Looks incredible. But yeah.
Looks like Octopath too.
Yeah, and it's by the team. I hope to God that it's just not named Project.
They built that team for Switch games, so
I hope they don't just drop the project, because it was like Project Octopath Traveler. Turns out it's Octopath Traveler. It's like, okay, just anyway. We'll see.
Project Triangle Strategy, isn't that what it's called? It sounds like a placeholder name.
Well, I hope so. Who knows? We'll see. It looks incredible. Like, I'm in on day one for that game. Absolutely. I've been itching for a good tactical game from Square. Anyway, so a couple things, especially the developer and me, the guy who's actually run development teams. I go and let's talk about the 70-30%, because he's right. There is an increased cost. People have used that increased cost for Xbox to say, like, no, the reason why we don't want it is because that would delay patches. I go, there's a money number here, right? Like, that increased resources should be offset by the fact that, hey, we added 300,000 or 500,000 more subscribers, and we added 2 new jobs to go and handle making sure that it's ready and it's going. Like, there's a money cost to offset that. I think that's just, but it is true. Like, you're going to add more platforms to publish for. You got to make sure you're hitting the tests. You got to make, you're not bricking consoles. Like, there's all kinds of things that go into that cost. But 70 and 30 here are talking about how, like, this is what is set in stone. Like, this is what we're working on. This is the cadence. This is your dungeon. This is your raid. This is the content that people expect. And saving 30% for idea, creativity, and more. That's all well and good. And I'm excited to see kind of that ratio. It kind of helps me set expectations in terms of, like, things that I want to see, knowing that 70% of their time is focusing in on the things that I expect. 2 tomes in a raid, like what we just talked about in today's video. So the core aspect of it is, now, is that actually looking at their total allocated time? And I've dealt with CEOs and executive, branch people who want people optimized 100%. I want them always working 100% of the time. And that leads to churn and burnout. And you don't want that. The right number that you want with an employee from a productivity perspective in America, according in development, in my lane of experience, maybe different companies have different rules, is about 75 to 80%. Meaning, when you're at work, 80% of your time is productive, 20% of it is you going on lunch breaks and you browsing the internet or watching a YouTube video. And I would actively encourage my guys to do that, because it's important. I always felt like their subconscious was very active when they're resting, and then they would be excited about the work they do. The people who were like, would never stop going to work, with the people who had the shortest time, at the company, because after 6 months or a year, they're like, I'm stressed, I'm always working. It's like, I told you to take breaks, man. Almost just like Yoshi-P says with this game. Like, if you're bored, if you're stressed, take a break.
Take breaks.
But so is that his 70-30%? Like, I'm wondering if that's a chunk of that 75% total, and that they're getting some natural rest time, because I think even when you look at the creative side, you got to have that downtime. Like, maybe that downtime for them is actually actively playing in the game's world. One of the things that I think Yoshi-P did real well with the team. One of the core differences when you look at a 1.0 to 2.0 is that the 1.0 team, they weren't seeing what else was out there in the market, but they weren't actively playing their game. And you, like, live in your world, play your game, and you're going to find the issues or the things that you and your friends want, and you'll actually have the power to go and bring those into the game itself, as opposed to just kind of like, oh yeah, we thought this would be cool, and just kind of throw it out there, and whether people use it or not or lose it. Any other thoughts on the 70, Chris, 70-30?
No, I think that I would take that 70-30 and now say, okay, within that, we know that 70-30 probably has some overhead baked in. So that 70-30 probably really adds up to Brian's 75 or 80, right?
Yeah.
It probably adds up to something less than 100. It says, here's the phrase at the top that I think is the second point. We have to think about now we can only emphasize the word so much because this is all done through a translator. We have to think about long-term planning with additional platforms. We need additional testing for that particular platform. That tells me he's not closing the door to other platforms in the above mentioned paragraph like people are saying. He's saying there's a number. And maybe if Microsoft would pay that number, that development starts today. Maybe if Microsoft doesn't pay that number, it's baked into the 30 million user number. We don't know, but it tells me there is an amount of resources where other platforms come online. Be that Stadia, be that xCloud, be that Xbox, be that a KFC console. It doesn't matter. It could go to anything given the resources. We have to think about long-term planning with additional platforms. We need additional testing for that particular platform. So it is an exponential growth. So we don't want to just do it willy-nilly, but we are not closing the door to it. This is very different than when he said, we will not add another race to the game.
Yeah.
That was so much more explicit.
Okay, so question on that then. Would you venture to say that, like, being that we know there's a PS4 version, a PS5 version, that like every iteration, every thing, it just creates another thing that they have to test for? Because if you think about it, if someone doesn't buy the expansion, like when they publish an update, that's still a version that's supported, that's out there that people have to figure out, right? So you think that I wonder
why WoW gives it away.
Right, exactly, because it's like, here's the, just making, like, cutting any previous, like, non-updated
Why are we
builds.
maintaining versions that don't make money?
But do you think, do you think that would then say, like, okay, no Xbox One, but Xbox Series X and S, like, okay, because that's one less version that eventually being, on a trajectory that you could see cut?
Yep, and I think Xbox, and I think if it was being considered for this generation, I think they were feeling pressure from Xbox to support 2 or more generations. Xbox One Series X, Xbox One X, Xbox One S, Xbox One are all still actively supported within the Xbox community. And now you're talking about coming up with a trial version, a basic version, a deluxe version or whatever, collectors, and then any additional versions that spin up where people have like partial expansions bought for all 4. So you're adding 12 to their 25 client types. That's insane.
Yeah.
You're increasing the number of platforms supported by 50%. So I think they're looking at Xbox and saying, your ecosystem is too expensive to develop for. What are you going to do about it? And I think it's a back and forth. They both, like, I want to go on vacation, me and my wife and Brian and his wife. I think it's great. And whenever he's ready to pay for it, we're ready to be there. And I think he feels the same way. And we've never taken vacation as 2 couples. Well, we probably need to have a meeting of the mind to say, okay, but this isn't free. Who's going to pay for this?
Yeah. That's so funny. We haven't taken a vacation.
Never happened. You and I have been on trips.
Yeah, that's true. Bring the wives. So we'll bring the wives next time. All right. Any thought you want to add on the 60 to 70% as well?
No, I just think it was a big section. I think that was, in my opinion, this was the biggest section of the whole article, but there is some other nuggets in here. That's the section that meant the most to me, who's looking at the long-term health of the game.
All right. Why don't you go ahead and take over the next section?
So this standardized approach, right? There's that word, and it's what the post's word, but it's very accurate. This standardized approach has helped the team become more efficient in creating dungeons. Because the game is a live service, he's wary about the team resting too much on their laurels when it comes to creative stories and features. That's why their approach leaves about 30% of the team's time to focus on innovation. It's great that his teams can anticipate the work, but it's less exciting if the player base is able to predict upcoming updates. With that being said, there's a major risk of boredom and fatigue. In order to mitigate that aspect, that's why we leave 30 to 40% outside of the bundled package, 2 tomes and a raid. He called it a bundled package, so that we can take on new challenges, think of new pieces of content that we can deliver, and sometimes we'll make use of that space over multiple patches to bring something larger scale. So by doing this, we still have sort of stability in our 60 to 70% regular content. This is why sometimes dungeons feel really like they just gave us what we expected. And then around the corner, we should have known, holy crap, Baldesian Arsenal is insane. Because they weren't doing 30% of innovation in each and every piece of content. They were pulling from each piece of content to invest that in something enormous.
Something bigger, something exciting to see. It's really cool to see that kind of payoff, whether it ends up being content that you were specifically looking forward to. And that's the risk, right? And that's where we see a lot of sometimes the drama kick up in terms of oh man, like they haven't delivered the thing that I love in a while, or they haven't iterated on the thing that I really enjoy. And it's like, occasionally, like I didn't like Eureka, but I love the Boja system. Like I just like, man, I wish they would update Eureka with some of these things to kind of have a more cohesive like experience. But then that takes time, right? And then would I rather them draw from that 30 to 40% to go and do something that exists, or would I rather have them invested in the future? And I think the answer is the future. At some point, there's a tipping balance, right? Like because I was talking with Leland today, and he is like he hasn't played for a while, but he's like, "What's this Boja stuff y'all talking about?" Oh, you're not there yet, right? There's a risk in terms of like where everybody's in this thing and doing something, and it's so far away from like the core game, and you're paying for it, and you never and you don't get to see it for months and months and months. All right.
Yeah, when I lived in Washington D.C., I would go to the Smithsonian's a lot, and they're free to walk in. And people were like, "Yeah, but like you just walk in." Like, well, who pays for that? We all do. The whole United States pays for them. We're just not all using them. I think this is a lot like that. It's back to that theme park metaphor. Mm-hmm. And many theme parks now allow you to check ride status online. But imagine if you pay the theme park entry fee and you show up and you go inside and the ride you wanted to ride is closed.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's frustrating. Go ahead.
The post asked Yoshida if he had any advice for developers of AAA live service games in a period that started with Bungie's Destiny in 2014. One year after Realm Reborn, more large publishers and developers started to create MMOs, but these games have almost always launched with equally massive problems. Yoshida is not commenting here on any specific title or genre, and he took great pains to underscore that every studio will have different needs and different plans for its games. He's so gracious. It's especially difficult to create these games, he said, when a studio is backed by multiple investors, all expecting a steady revenue source. And I imagine that was like 5 minutes of translating back and forth to before I talk, let's get this clear. It's really crucial to understand how monetization is going to interweave with the actual gameplay. Look at some recent examples. It does seem like the studios kind of throw on monetization elements and scramble to do so when the game is out there. It seems to be quite a challenge for those who come from console games. I wonder why he was so clear about the fact that this is not any one particular game studio developer. It's just like, if a game were to do a Realm Reborn by deleting all the previous characters and then change monetization multiple times while implementing on consoles where people are not used to these type of things, it's like a game would have trouble with its identity.
Yeah, the monetization is also a big issue because I submit monetization is also a lesson in trust between the player and the developer. And when it changes, or when it feels like, wait a minute, like, why do I need, because like to the people who are like, I want my games to be free and I'm never going to pay a dime, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, there's a platform for you. It's called your mobile, slot machine casino game that we don't cover. But like at the core of it, like, okay, how does this game thrive and build? And having an understanding of what that monetization system is from day one till day 500 to day 5,000 is important, because that helps you set cadences. One of the things about their cadence is driven a lot based off of just predictability, right? They're not having to build some kind of slutty like image or whatever to help drive lots of sales so that they can continue to fund the next round of dungeon content. And, I think gamers are more than apt to help fund games they love and support games they love. But at the core of it, like, I think he nails it on the head. We've seen multiple games come out. We're a subscription game. Oh, no, we're not. We're this. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that you've got investors, rightfully so, who've poured money into this project and they're expecting a return on it, like they've seen returns on bigger games. But with World of Warcraft and even with Final Fantasy XIV, they're backed by one studio. Yes, multiple games maybe funneling the development of that, because they've got multiple like irons in the fire. But Square Enix isn't being called up by, like all their different shareholders.
Triangle strategy isn't calling them and going, "Where's my money?
Where's my money?" And then it ends up, I think, giving them the ability to really like this. And I think also the other move, and it's not really here, Yoshi-P removing the bonus of their development team based off of Metacritic and just being like, here's your bonus. So your bonus isn't tied to some arbitrary opinion of the internet. I think helps free them to make content they want to make and not worry about some kind of, like how is this going to be scored so that I can take my family on a vacation after spending 9 months locked in like working my butt off, for this expansion, etc.
Yeah, and you said we don't normally cover mobile games, but what'd you put in? 20, 40, 100 plus hours in Genshin?
Yeah, but I
The
played it on PC.
monetization was up front.
Yeah, it's honest as to what it is.
It is honest to what it is.
Yeah, it's like it's not trying to be
that's
something.
all he's saying. And it was baked in from the very get-go. Is that game was designed with the way it chooses to monetize in mind. That was not layered on after the fact. Yoshida was famous for coming into a Realm Reborn project completely unknown to the team who had worked on it, but armed with timetables and project goals to follow, he stressed that realistic goals and strict schedules must be outlined far in advance. Ideally, we want at least 2 years worth of plans already made when you're starting out, what kind of content we want to incorporate, and where we want to take the game. Structure your system so that it will accommodate for those updates and have your base foundation design on those plans in mind, having those updates considered as part of the plan. Having a set amount of work enabled his team to create tools to make the work even easier. The ideal situation is that you're not worrying about any of this stuff around launch period which leads to chaos. The spaghetti code is the unfortunate area where he was not able to do this, but since then, like Brian, you mentioned, like he plans many years in advance. Now that doesn't mean they know every last story piece of dialogue. That's how we end up with a Q&A where the lead, the people in charge of the story say like, we don't actually know the answer to that yet. There are small details and ramifications that aren't worked out, but they know big storyline type things, the milestones, and they've gone over that in past panels.
And so at the core of it, like we kind of talked earlier about his like 5 years, is that people have been asking, like, if this game ends in 5 years, do we want them to do another MMO? And honestly, like, I would say that if they're going to ever do that, like, if they want to keep going into the guts of the engine, refining it, fixing the code, that takes time and effort. But if that's the plan, then 14 could literally go on for another 10 years, another 20 years, as long as they really want to support the game. I think that they were ever going to do like an engine shift or anything like that, I'd want it to be done in the right way. I would want it to be something that's exciting, that takes advantage of all the latest technology, that really incorporates like a well thought out system, so you don't have a launch that went like 1.0. Like launch in a full completed state and then build that excitement up from there. So if they can go and sit here and instead of having to do an engine swap here in 5 years or 6 years, but they can continue to refine the engine itself, update continue to update and improve upon the game, like that actually would be really cool and ideal to be playing 14 here in 10 years, obviously like with more improvements along those lines. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see because I love how they got those multiple year plans. I think that's really important because as a developer, they can sit down and they know what they're working on. Where you look at games where they've really struggled, it's like it's been chaos. Like, oh, should we do this or should we do that? And no one's actually making a decision. Here they're saying like 70% of the developer's work is laid out. Build dungeon. Here's the bosses. Go for it. And then so they can just kind of get to work, get the stuff done, and deliver content on a fairly regular basis, which satisfies the player base.
Yes. Final Fantasy XIV has also been lauded as one of the better written entries in the series, a notable accolade for being one of only 2 of the franchise's massively online games. Yoshida confirms that he and 4 story writers conceived the premise first, usually locking themselves in a rental meeting room somewhere in a ward of Tokyo, and the stories are usually planned out far in advance. For Endwalker, the story was written by October of 2019. So pre-COVID, all these delays were not the plan. For Stormblood expansion in 2017, said he directed the team to write a story around the character Omega, a recurring super boss. Once they sketch up a rough concept of the plot, the writers would send ideas to the battle team to start planning game mechanics around the planned fights and dungeons. He said that he wasn't satisfied with how combat scenarios and stories didn't gel until the team got more experience through Stormblood. It's the same team that worked on the 2 other contents, but you could see there's such an improvement in what they were able to bring to the table. Even though Final Fantasy XIV may not be ending soon, he has now begun to shift his attention to as producer for Final Fantasy XVI, the next single-player chapter in the series. It's thought of as a reward for steering the online ship so well, and this will be his first stint in directing a mainline single-player adventure.
Except for he's not the director, he is the producer of it. But yes, thank you very much, Washington Post. I'm excited to see what him and the team deliver for 16, especially as we've seen the team from Stormblood improve with Shadowbringers, and I think Endwalker is going to be really exciting. One of the things that I've noticed with this is that the Heavensward team has been working on 16, and the real, I think, sign of his leadership is like whether you agree with his like the choice or a patch or an expansion of this game, is that if he's able to develop resources in his team and they can continue to get stronger and more exciting, like he's building up like great game developers who are hopefully passionate about this. So overall, the health of life of 14 or even the future of another Final Fantasy MMO, like is going to be in like hands of people and leadership and like a vision that's really clear and hopefully to be able to capitalize on. So I'm excited about whatever the future for 14 holds.
He's very much drafted and built his own dream team, and you see more and more projects being mentioned by names that we're excited about. Some of those names being very homegrown within Square Enix.
Mm-hmm.
They're not coming from a big pedigree elsewhere. They're coming from an in-house pedigree, which means they're being groomed into this right there in-house. And so he's done a great job of continuing to foster any programs that have made that happen internally. That's really exciting. I think they talked about panels at FanFest, maybe EU last time. They were talking about how story is written, and it really is a back and forth. So they write these big milestones, and then maybe they draw a map first or whatever, and then it goes out, and there's like, oh, these are the boss fights, and it comes back, and they're like, okay, well, if those are the boss fights, how would we get to those bosses? Like, or if those mechanics need it. So it's a back and forth, but they lock themselves away. So he talks about like they've literally taken the team for some of these expansions and gone and put the whole team in different, I think they said it was like a rental house or something. It was like 10 of them locked in there for like a week. And so they just go and they were prepping for quarantine. And so they've been doing this and they're planned really far in advance. I have no idea how that stuff doesn't leak ever, but it doesn't. It's exciting. When asked if he could indicate any kind of hint as to what the game might entail outside of the trailer that debuted in September, he chuckled and said he won't be saying anything, but he did elaborate on why he's keeping his mouth shut until his team could have more to show. We don't want to say something that's half-baked and cause speculation on the title. With any Final Fantasy fan, depending on which Final Fantasy title is your jam, the point that you get excited will tend to differ. He's not wrong. For many cyberpunk anime aesthetic of 7, for the first PlayStation was their introduction, while older games will fondly remember the more magical elements of the older Nintendo titles, or maybe they prefer the young adult dramas of the later series. It's important to note that Final Fantasy isn't an ongoing universe, but a series of disconnected, self-contained stories featuring completely different worlds and characters.
And this is something where it's interesting that when we have threads between them, like Gilgamesh being one, like there's some threads between these titles and these universes, which is fun to kind of play with. And hopefully we'll see Greg come back in 14 at some point again. I need to get caught up on Hildebrand anyway. That's just kind of like my life goals in this case.
Sid's a funny one, right?
Yeah.
Like in 15, Sid looks a tiny bit different. In the cut off Daisy Dukes as the young lady. Like Sid is almost a theme and not so much an individual character. He's pretty good at, I think they're learning from getting burned with spoilers. They used to talk about battle changes partially in part 1 of Live Letters and then complete the thought in part 2. And now they say there will be battle changes and then they outline them entirely in part 2 because it never benefited them. It was either neutral or bad. It never came out ahead. And so I think they're getting better at like saying, okay, we have very carefully crafted what we're ready to release. Let's not do another Male Vieira moment. We can be better at this. So from what can be gleaned of the recent trailer, Yoshida's 16 will at least be a bloodier and more medieval affair than we've seen from the series in decades. Each person will probably have their own sort of idea or image of what the next Final Fantasy should be. Saying something half-baked is definitely very high risk. If something gets spoken about, someone will pick it up on social and it starts to spread around and people will form expectations. So with 16, whenever we do reveal more information, we hope to show what kind of game it's going to bring and what kind of excitement we can bring. I will say that the 14 trailer for Endwalker we chopped the tail off of a freaking monster and then jumped to a personal intimate heal while there were like crazy flying around robotic things. I've been running DR a lot lately.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember chopping the tail off anything. So like, I wouldn't take a trailer as a trailer is what happens in your imagination when you read a book. It is not a direct representation of gameplay.
Yeah, but he also is calling out essentially problems that Final Fantasy at its core has had problems with Square Enix, like in terms of like, here's this thing and you have 10 years of hype. And when gamers don't understand development, a 10-year game project means there's been problems. That means they've restarted. That means like,
yeah, things have been deleted.
You know, oops is a good term that we would say. And so with that, like that's why but in the gamer's mind, they're like, they've been working on this for 10 years. I played a game that they worked on for 4 years. This is going to be 2.5 times better than, you know, like in terms of time. It's like, oh, that probably means this, you know, no, this is probably going to be the worst. So when he talks about that, like, it's also about like, that's what I was saying. Don't tell me about the next game until you're close, because I can't do another 10 years. When I saw 7 Remake, I was like, that looks like a great game that I'm going to play in 2020. And I was right. And I was joking. And that's so sad. And so with 16, like, I think the next reveal is going to focus more on gameplay and systems and things like that. And that will be much more information than we've received in a long time. And I think that's an exciting choice that they're making, because it allows for that structure to kind of play out and hopefully have a good time. It sounds like my door is being knocked on. Chris, you got any final thoughts before we wrap up today's video?
Thank you to Gene Park. Like, you know, I mean, there's obviously going to, anytime somebody who has to cover all of games tries to cover 14, they're not going to get every single exact word choice correct. We don't get every word choice, and we do this all the time. You having a journalism degree, but not having knowledge of 10 years of what does that 20 million number read? What is 2 tomes in a raid? Like, I think this was pretty good coverage for a mainstream outlet.
Yeah.
So thanks to the Washington Post for covering this. If you guys want to go read that, want to refer to some of the exact sentences in here, go give that a click, give that a page view. So big thanks to that. I think this was one of the better interviews we've had in a while.
Yeah, this is solid. There was some really good information, especially in regards to the 7030. That's such good information for me to know. And hopefully that you enjoyed that and my thoughts there. And then outside of the 7030, the concept of the work that goes into the patch cycle and more. And hopefully if they do decide, if Xbox does decide that they want that, you know, that Phil Spencer just writes them the check and we can go forward and be like, let's be done with this drought. But yeah,
and Phil is like, yeah, whenever Yoshi-P wants to call me up and say he's got my check. So I assume it's a two-way street.
Yeah, exactly. All right, guys, for Work to Game, my name's Brian.
My name's Chris.
Thanks so much for watching, and we hope to see you in our next one. But until then,
take care.